I'm on location inside the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's my pleasure and privilege to be here with director Steven Jenkins.
Well, Dave, welcome to Tulsa. I'm so impressed that you've come all the way from central England to be here with us at the Dylan Center.
Small Biz Digital Media presents Connect, Convince, Convert, Inspiring Business Success Stories with Dave Bird, Steve Ennis, and Martin Hill.
Well, back home, I'd say just about everyone I meet has heard of Bob Dylan. But I get the vibe they regard him as a bygone artist from the 60s and perhaps not relevant in modern times. So why should Bob Dylan have this centre?
I understand that response from some folks who maybe didn't follow his career or haven't continued to follow his career since the heyday of the 60s. But of course, there are decades since then of extraordinary work that position Dylan uniquely within our culture, American culture, global music culture, as just the kind of artist that does in fact merit the deep dive that one can do with this center. Dylan's been hard at work since the very early 1960s. He's still very active today. As we speak, he's on tour with Willie Nelson on the Outlaw Tour. He never fails to surprise us as he continues to follow his own path. And that's what we're really inspired by here. We have the unique opportunity to delve into Dylan's life and work because we have his own archive here. Essentially, Dylan had been keeping things for many years without any real plan as to what to do with them. In about 2016, he and his team decided, this material had built up to such an extent, we should really find a permanent home for it. It has cultural import. Fans will want to come and see this material. Scholars and academics will be interested in coming in and studying it. And so Dylan chose Tulsa. To make a long story short, he was drawn here in large part because our same organization runs the Woody Guthrie Center, which is just on the same block here in Tulsa's Arts District. Guthrie being the formative influence for Dylan. Dylan's very first song for Woody. This is how important he was in the early years. So when Dylan was considering where to find a permanent home for this voluminous archive, tens of thousands of objects, he ultimately chose Tulsa. And it's to our great honor that we steward this collection. I think that any visitor who comes in, whether a diehard Dylanologist or a more casual fan, will quickly come to appreciate that Dylan, in fact, remained extraordinarily active and creative following that 1960s heyday. And we have seen masterpiece after masterpiece, constant reinventions of the self and of what popular music can do. And so we really celebrate that fearless creativity by looking at Dylan's career in an almost kaleidoscopic way. So yes, the 60s heyday is represented well, but we're just as interested in the most recent work, 2020's Rough and Rowdy Ways, and other recent material.
Totally agree with that. Critics of Dylan's music also complain that he can't sing. What evidence do we have in the centre to suggest otherwise?
Well, I've never quite understood the Dylan can't sing criticism. I recognize that perhaps his voice, which can be nasally at times, or slurred if he wants it to be, or any number of things, can be somewhat of an acquired taste for some listeners. But we have so many performances here, audio recordings, and then film and video, where you see Dylan on stage and in the studio. And for me, granted, I've been a somewhat obsessive fan since I was quite young, I think that Dylan uses his voice in as creative and deliberate a manner as he does anything else, from writing lyrics to performing on stage to choosing photographs for album covers. Everything is well considered. And Dylan's voice I find to be enormously expressive. If you hear him singing something like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll in the early 60s, going all the way to maybe a reimagining of Ballad of a Thin Man or any of the other classics from the 60s that he still performs occasionally today. And again, you just hear a consideration of what the human voice can do, what Dylan's own voice can do. He's aware of the cadences that work well for him. So I challenge those listeners who say, I like his songs, but I don't like his voice much, just listen a little more clearly and perhaps set aside preconceived notions of what a pop singer, a rock singer, a country singer, a ballad singer, a singer of the Great American Songbook should sound like. Dylan's never been concerned with categorical norms, and so I think as listeners, we should be a little freer in our interpretation as well.
I can relate to that too. Now, Dylan is famously enigmatic and difficult to pin down. So what contact, if any, have you had with him?
So Dylan gave this whole project his blessing. It was his choice to have his archive and all of these tens of thousands of materials and items, one of a kind, handwritten lyrics, notebooks, journals, photographs, instruments, ephemera of all sort that he had been holding on to. He wanted them to be here in Tulsa. He then made it clear that he really didn't want to be involved. Paradoxically, though he kept everything, he has really always espoused the don't look back philosophy. I'm taking a phrase from the title of a documentary about him by D.A. Pennebaker from the mid-1960s, always look ahead. He seems to be far more interested in tomorrow night's show, the next song, who's he going to collaborate with, paintings that he's working on, metalwork and sculpture, all these aspects of his artistry. And he doesn't want to look back, though he saved everything. So there's a bit of a paradox. But he has not been involved. We have freedom to contextualize this work as we see fit. So our goal has really been to make this much more than just memorabilia. It's fun to see a guitar that someone played, say at the Hard Rock Cafe, that sort of setting. But we really have set out to do more than that. We try to put these materials within a socio-political context as we're tracing Dylan's development as an artist and telling stories with the objects as opposed to just fetishizing a guitar. Dylan has given us great freedom, and that's allowed us to also bring in the work of other artists. While it is all Dylan all the time, there is room here at the Center for exhibitions, for example, on the great English-Irish band The Pogues, whose fearless leader Shane MacGowan passed away late last year. Early in 2024, we had an exhibition here all about that band and Shane as a remarkable singer-songwriter. We've presented concerts by a number of different artists, from Elvis Costello, who claims he learned everything he knew from Dylan and Joni Mitchell, to the Pretenders, led by the amazing Chrissie Hynde, to Mavis Staples, to Patti Smith. And we really celebrate creativity writ large. I think if Dylan wasn't happy with that approach, we might hear about it, but certainly that's not been the case. So far, we believe we're honoring Dylan in all his multiplicity.
I find the business owners I work with often struggle scripting their video content. So give us some insights about Dylan's approach to songwriting.
Well, it's been an ever-evolving process. In the early days, he does say that some of the songs just seem to spring forth as if he were, just the vessel for that process. So you have dozens and dozens of verses for something like a Rolling Stone or Subterranean Homesick Blues, which he would then very painstakingly edit and create into the songs that we know. One thing we're trying to do is perhaps belie that notion that, well, Dylan's just a genius. He operates on some other plane than mere mortals. We don't know how he does it. We're just thankful that he does. Granted, there's some truth to that. I mean, I would say that he is operating on a somewhat different plane than most of us. But it doesn't mean that, like all great artists of whatever art form, he wakes up every day and really works hard at this. And we see this through the archival materials perhaps more clearly than ever before. If you look at the journal that has 40 pages of lyrics to the song Dignity, a song that he recorded several times and kept deleting from the final track list, I think that's a great example. If you look at Jokerman, the kickoff song from the Infidels record from 1983, we have here in the archive, and we showcase at least 10 different iterations of the lyrics to that song. This is a craftsman who is applying to the best of his ability all of his gifts, all of his wordplay, his observations, his preternatural ability to see any issue or any person from all sides, to step into someone else's shoes, as Grail Marcus has noted. about Dylan and really come across with empathy as he's writing in the voice of other characters or about other characters. This is not just I woke up and wrote a masterpiece. That might have happened a couple times, but by Dylan's own admission, he ceased to write that way. And it is just the process of sitting down at the typewriter or with a pen and paper in hand and working through what he wants to say and how to say it.
As a content creator, I know how important it is to have fresh material as well as your evergreen stuff. So tell us about the exhibitions you run.
Sure. So the center here, we're 2 floors with about 15,000 square foot of just exhibition space. And there are items we envision as being on display permanently. Some of the real gems, a whole section on, for example, like a Rolling Stone or Not Dark Yet. And we dive deep into the writing, the recording, the performing, the second and third lives that these songs have taken on. Then on our second floor, we do have a large space where we have rotating exhibitions. So we do try to keep things fresh. Right now, there is a Dylan-centric rotating exhibition called How Many Roads? Bob Dylan and His Changing Times, 1961 through 1964. And this contextualizes Dylan within the civil rights movement. Not that he was the great white savior of the time. He was just an observer and a participant who was writing so thoughtfully and beautifully and with such impact about victims of horrible racist violence. He was at the March on Washington, but so were lots of other folks. And so we've brought all of those players from that time, the musicians, the activists, into this exhibition to really look at how Dylan's songwriting was influenced by what was going on around him in Greenwich Village, in Washington, during those tumultuous years, and how, in fact, his writing and his very presence, to some extent, shaped that movement. So there's a real back and forth there. We have a number of other exhibitions in the works. We're already scheduled pretty much into mid-2026 at this point. And I think that visitors will be surprised. Hopefully they'll find the exhibitions we have in store illuminating. All will involve Dylan, if not directly, then tangentially. But again, because we look at Dylan as this exemplar of fearless creativity, that allows us to bring in the work of other musicians and artists. And so we have some of that coming up too, details of which will be forthcoming in the next few weeks.
Inside the museums, Infinity goes up on trial, a Dylan line that fits with the extensive archives you have of his work. So tell us about them.
It's quite overwhelming to think that we have around 100,000 items. Many of these are recordings. What I find most exciting in many ways are the handwritten lyrics. This is Dylan waking up in the middle of the night, or maybe never having gone to sleep in the first place, at a hotel and picking up hotel stationery and starting to write out the words to what becomes name your favorite classic. We have what's known as the Blood Notebook. These are small pocketbooks that Dylan was carrying around, we believe, for a series of months, in which he was developing the songs that appear on the Blood on the Tracks record from 1975, hence the name The Blood Notebooks. Fascinating to see how songs like Tangled Up in Blue, Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, You're a Big Girl Now, Simple Twist of Fate, all those incredible songs on that record were being developed. And he was coming up with lines, but wasn't yet sure which line was going to come next and sorting things out. So those are really worth a look. Like any center or museum, there's much more in the archive than we can display at any one time. For scholars and academics, there's the ability to apply for access to these materials. So if someone is writing a book, as someone has, the wonderful writer Terry Gans, as an example, really wanted to write about the making of the Infidels record. So he came in and, ahead of time, requested access to any and all materials related to that album in that period of time. And as a result, we have a whole new book on that chapter of Dylan's discography. The idea is not to hoard or shut away these materials, but to really make them as accessible as we can to all visitors, all viewers, and then scholars and academics, again, can apply to go a bit deeper.
Excellent. I'm going to put you on the spot now. What's your own personal favourite Dylan song and why?
My own personal favorite Dylan song, probably changes from day to day or week to week. So, sometimes it's easy to divide up by decade, at least, which might be cheating a bit. There's no denying, like a Rolling Stone, to me, it still sounds like the future, not like a song that was written and recorded nearly 60 years ago. So Forrest, I might choose that as my favorite from the 60s, but it's ignoring so many others. Getting into the 70s, Simple Twist of Fate, lines come to me all the time. Getting into the 80s, I do love the Infidels record, something like Jokerman or Sweetheart Like You. But then going up to 1989, you have the Oh Mercy record, which is one of my favorites. And from there, I would choose Most of the Time, just a beautiful song with a narrator that's trying to fool himself, but we can sort of see and hear through it. There's an outtake from that period called Series of Dreams, which appeared on the Bootleg Volumes 1 through 3 collection. That's one of my absolute favorites. And you hear something like that and think, who else but Dylan would decide, not quite good enough for the standard album, or maybe it just didn't fit the mood of the rest of those songs. But I think that is an absolute knockout of a song. Just about anything off of Time Out of Mind. You have all of the gems on Love and Theft, and on and on. And I would go right up to 2020's Rough and Rowdy Ways, which came as this remarkable surprise in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Suddenly here we have a 17-minute song, Murder Most Foul, which no doubt many a PhD thesis will be written about that song alone. But the songs on that record, I particularly am drawn to My Own Version of You, and I've made up my mind to give myself to you. Those two captivate me as much as any of the songs I've grown up with. And I'm waiting to hear what's next, like all other fans.
Absolutely. Knowing your audience is incredibly important for marketing an attraction like this. So tell us more about the people who visit.
What's been most gratifying about the first 2.5 years here at the Dylan Center in Tulsa is the fact that visitors have come truly from far and wide. So I think within our first few months, we had visitors from all 50 states in the U.S., and now we've been counting countries. We have you, Dave, from England, and many of your countrymen have been here from throughout the U.K. I think we're up to about 40 countries now. We had a multi-generation family come in from Lithuania, and I was just thrilled to see the grandfather, making the pilgrimage here with his son and his grandson, and they were all interacting with the materials here in different ways. We've had delegations from China, many Australians, you name it. Dylan's music and just his very self resonates so strongly and so personally with people in so many different ways. And we're just thrilled that they're finding their way here to Tulsa. I think they're enjoying the Dylan Center, if I do say so. Folks have shared with me that there's been a very profound experience for them. It's not uncommon to see visitors shedding a tear or breaking out in song, or there have been some spontaneous dance parties. There was a group from Poland who were somewhat reluctant to express themselves and how they were feeling about the experience until they entered our recording studio experience on the first floor, where you really get to go behind the scenes and you hear Dylan and his fellow musicians chattering in the recording studio. We have a whole visual display there. And they all broke into the chorus of Knocking on Heaven's Door together. It was wonderful, and I love when those moments happen here.
Seeing this massive collection you've put together, the immersive video is really cool, and the quality of the audio guides is fantastic. I actually became emotional myself as a fan, so thank you so much for making my long trip to Tulsa so worthwhile, Steven, and for doing this interview.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to talk, and I'm so glad that the center resonates for you as a longtime fan, too. Thank you.
This episode of Connect, Convince, Convert was produced and presented by Dave Bird. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it, so you don't miss any future shows.